Morning, everyone. Fine greetings from Friday morning. I'd just like to welcome all of you to this webinar, and basically it is the midterm evaluation of the Centres of Specialisation Workshop. I'll be your chair. My name is Seamus Needham, and I'm part of a project team that is managing a 5-year TVET research program in partnership with the Department of Higher Education and Training and the National Skills Fund. This particular project, which was the midterm evaluation of the Centres of Specialisation, is actually one of the research projects. And we're just delighted to basically be part of this and to welcome all of you. I'd like to extend a special welcome to the Deputy Director General, Mr. Sam Zungu, for being in attendance, and hope that all protocol is observed. Basically, I'd just like to, in the interest of time, we've got quite a tight program, just basically do a very brief biography for Mr. Sam Zungu. He's a PhD candidate and a multi-skilled veteran of the education sector. He's been recently appointed as the Deputy Director General for TVET and has more than 2 decades of experience as a skills development and training practitioner. He was a former principal of Umfolozi TVET College, and within that role, he was firming partnerships with industry, including Sweden's Kalmar Maritime Academy for the establishment of the Umfolozi TVET Maritime Academy, as well as cooperation between Germany's Klaes Handwerkerschaft for the establishment of the Umfolozi TVET Civil and Construction Centre of Excellence. Mr. Zungu has also served on various boards, including as chairperson of the Transport Education and Training Authority, advisory board member of the South African International Maritime Institute, and a ministerial task team member for the establishment of the South African Institute for Vocational and Continuing Education and Training. Mr. Zungu says he's more than ready for the challenge that the new role brings. He counts honesty, integrity, and emotional intelligence amongst his likes. Mr. Zungu's optimism is highly infectious. By 2030, Mr. Zungu's vision is a more inclusive TVET system that caters adequately for people with disabilities and with emphasis on gender sensitivity. He wants to increase the number of artisans produced by the TVET sector in line with the projected economic growth as a country. And Mr. Zungu envisions a highly digitized teaching and learning environment that allows innovation and entrepreneurship for both students and staff. And his final quote is, producing students that are able to face the 21st century challenges head on without any fear or failure. So without any more ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Sam Zungu. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Needham, for such an introduction. Really appreciate the opportunity to address you this morning. Indeed, I'm excited to be part of this webinar, which I think it comes at the right time, as we are busy as a country trying to adjust ourselves with the impact of COVID, and how do we align ourselves in terms of the provisioning of the skills that will be required for us as a sector to respond to such economic demands. Let me first acknowledge the presence of our panel members, Ms. Khada Magnus, who comes from our branch, from the Department of Education and Training. Let me also extend a warm welcome to Mr. Mukhatsane from MESITA. A warm welcome to Mr. Mustaq Ali. I don't know if he is from Busa this time, because sometimes he says, no, I'm not from Busa. I hope he's representing Busa this morning. Let me also extend a warm welcome to Ms. Zandile Nkabinde, who's from Majuba TVET College, And also a warm welcome to Ms. Bray, and also Mr. Sabelo Buthelezi, who has been the champion for the Centres of Specialisation from the Department of Higher Education and Training in the TVET branch. Colleagues, let me also welcome all the representatives from the various TVET colleges who are partaking in this webinar, as well as representatives from business and other government departments that are present this morning. Let me also welcome all of you, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests to this very important midterm evaluation of Centres of Specialisation Programme, the Advocacy Workshop. Indeed, I think all of us colleagues will agree with me that TVET colleges are indeed at the epicenter of the provisioning of the entry and the midterm skills that the country so desperately need in trying to provide a solution or a response in what we call the triple challenges that we find ourselves faced with, that of inequality, poverty, and unemployment. I think the recent statistics have shown in terms of the growth in the youth unemployment. And I think as a department, we have to provide a response to that. And the only response we can provide as Department of Higher Education and Training, particularly the TVET branch, is to find ways or means of providing skills programs that will probably respond in those challenges. Colleagues, we as a department, some few years back, because of the challenges and the demands from industry, to say we have to be responsive at TVET colleges, taking from the white paper for post-school education, the NDP, and looking at the recent ERP, I think it is clear that colleges indeed have a critical role to play in making sure that our economy grows, and by growing also it's able to create job opportunities for this high number of the unemployed youth. And in response, the Centres of Specialisation were established. You will know, colleagues, that if you have to embark on a journey, you jump onto your car, everything is fine, you check your dashboard, it shows whether you've got enough gas or not, and then you start embarking on a journey, and along the way, the dashboard just switches off. The question is, will you continue with the journey or will you stop until you have a dashboard? The dashboard is important because it will tell you whether you still have adequate gas, your tires are fine and everything, the engine is fine, then you can embark on your journey. And I think this exercise and this evaluation is part of providing that dashboard to say, here's a pilot that we have started as a department. How are we doing? Are we yielding the results or the desired results that we set ourselves from the beginning? And for me, given my background as a former college principal, I think when the concept of Centres of Specialisation was presented, I said, wow, this is one solution that we needed as TVET colleges. In fact, if it was for me, we would have just started without even piloting and just rolling out. But you know, the reality of project of such nature and of such magnitude, we have to make sure that you start somewhere and then build on all the gaps that you might have identified along the way. So I think this evaluation is going to assist us to give more or less the picture of where we are, whether there's been any impact in terms of the rollout of this program. But from where I stand, I have been listening also to some of the colleagues from the colleges to say, we wish all of us were now operating on that model. Remember, this is one model that is assisting us to get closer to industry, to get closer to our stakeholders and understand their needs in terms of the requirements of the skills that are required in this field. So I think on that note, colleagues, let me once again welcome all of you to this webinar. And I wish everything of the best, and I hope everything will go well. At the end, we will have to hear the findings of the study and then see how we take this process going forward. Chairperson, thank you very much, and welcome to all of you. I thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Zongo. That was very elegant welcome. Thank you. And firstly, I think you've also just really outlined the purpose of the workshop extremely well. Thank you. So we're going to move on just to basically immediately into the overview of the key findings. And this is going to be presented by Ms. Zudeka Bray. And so Zudeka Bray worked as an economist at DNA Economics from 2012 to 2019 before moving to Trialogue for 2 years, where I think she was involved directly with this research. She has since returned to DNA Economics in 2021 as the head of the Financial Markets and Digital Innovation Practice. Zudeka is a development economist with skills and experience in program design, implementation, and monitoring and evaluation in both the public and the private sector. She has experience in a wide variety of social development issues, including finance, health, basic and higher education, entrepreneurship, and socioeconomic development. Zudeka also holds a master's in development finance from the University of Stellenbosch. So with that, welcome Zudeka, and over to you.
Thank you, Seamus. Please allow me to just share my screen. Please, can you just confirm that you can see it?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So thank you very much, Seamus, for that introduction, and good morning to the DDG and ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for the presentation on the findings of this midterm evaluation today. Just a brief overview in terms of what we're going to cover. The DDG has gone through the background of the COS program, so I won't labor that too much. I'll just add on some of the key differences in terms of how the COS program differs from the traditional approach of TVET college training. We'll talk at a very high level through the theory of change of this program and how we see our inputs and activities ultimately leading to the change that we'd like to see. And then we'll talk through the findings of the evaluation. And this is in 3 specific categories. So we looked at relevance and appropriateness of the program. We looked at the efficiency of implementation, and we looked at what sort of effectiveness we have seen to date. And each of these will be defined as we go along. So just looking at a little bit of the background, what we know is that South Africa has embarked on a development journey to economic growth, and this is to address our triple challenges, and as mentioned by the DDG. But in order for us to actually get this right and for us to achieve this goal, we need a skilled workforce. That is the central pillar behind us actually achieving that. However, we know from research that South Africa has a significant mismatch between the skills needed in the economy to achieve this objective, this growth objective, and the skills that are currently available in the labor market. And to overcome this, we see government and stakeholders actually making a deliberate and concerted effort to design and implement strategies that aim to coordinate skills development. It's that coordination of skills development that is very important to ensure that the skills that are delivered are fit for purpose and relevant. In designing some of these solutions for skills development, the PSET system, or the post-school education and training system, and the TVET colleges, so your technical and vocational education and training colleges in particular, have been one of the key points of focus. And the reason for this is because they're seen to be best placed to make skills development fit for purpose and more responsive to both current and future economic needs. However, we know that the TVET system is not without its challenges, and some of these include that TVET colleges are not always able to function optimally in the delivery of skills. We know that their reputation is sometimes seen as an inferior education provider, especially when compared against universities, And that means that it's not always the first choice for young people who are pursuing further education and training. And the third one that's quite key as well is that the private sector appear to have lost confidence in the quality of education at or graduates from TVET colleges. And in light of this, the Department of Higher Education and Training, or DHET, is trying to make the system more responsive with improvements to both quality and capacity within TVET colleges. And one of these is the Centre of Specialisation Programme, which is the focus of today's discussion. So if we look at what is the Centre of Specialisation Programme, so the program starts by establishing a dedicated department or faculty within a TVET college. This is a host TVET college, which will then have this faculty or department that will be established in it. This is then known as the Centre of Specialisation within the TVET college. The Centre of Specialisation then acts as an anchor point. And what it does is it brings together industry and the TVET college in order to deliver a dual system training approach. And by that, we mean it consists of theory and practical application in both a simulated and workplace experience way, but also done in an integrated fashion. So there's continuous movement between theory, practical, and workplace experience. There are 4 components to this program, and these are seen in the diagram, and each apprentice must go through these. It's the theoretical knowledge component. There's a practical knowledge component, which is done in a workshop environment at the TVET college. There's a workplace experience component, which is done within an employer. And then it all ends with a competency test in the form of the external integrated summative assessment, or also known as the ASA. Sorry, I apologize for that. And all of this is delivered over a 3-year period for each cohort. So when did the program actually start? It started in 2019, and it started by establishing centers of specialization at 26 TVET sites. So we use the word sites, not colleges, because for some colleges, there's more than one site in play. So we actually only have 19 public TVET colleges participating, but 26 sites. These are spread throughout South Africa, as you can see on the map on your screen. In terms of the identification of the priority trades, we know that government has the strategic infrastructure projects. There are 18 strategic infrastructure projects that have been identified to help boost economic growth in South Africa. And there was research done by the Department of Higher Education and Training to find out what were the most critical skills needed for the SIPs that were missing. And there were 13 trades that were identified, and these are the ones that are the focus of the first cohort of the Centres of Specialisation. If we look at, and then each trade is offered at two sites, hence the 26 sites that we've got. We may ask the question then, what's different? What actually makes the Centre of Specialisation Programme different to the traditional TVET approach? And we'll just go through some of these here side by side. You'll see there's a block on the top for the traditional approach and a block at the bottom for the COS approach, and we'll just go through them. The first one is, in the traditional approach, all public TVET colleges are able to offer all approved programs. Each TVET college will determine its own program and qualification mix, and therefore it can determine which qualifications it would like to offer. Whereas under the COS program approach, your Centre of Specialisation will only specialize in 1 or 2 trades. So it's focused specifically on just those trades for which it has been selected. The second difference is that in the traditional approach, your qualifications are not always linked to competence, whereas in your Centre of Specialisation Programme, all new qualifications reflect occupational competence, and that's why we have the ASA at the end. In the third difference is that under your traditional approach, our curricula are often outdated or they're not aligned to industry needs. Whereas under the COS project, all the curricula that have been recently redesigned, and we'll talk about this later under the findings, have been designed in collaboration with industry. So they are fit for purpose and they are relevant. If we look at the fourth difference, it's under the traditional approach, your trade theory tends to be front loaded, and that's then followed by a practical, the practical experience, and there often tends to be long lead times between the theory and the practice. Under the COS approach, trade theory, practice, and work experience is integrated and sequenced. There's actually a document called the NOC, and again, we'll talk about this later, which integrates and sequences how modules are taught in theory and then practically applied either in the workshop environment or in the workplace. Under the traditional approach, many students got little or no practical or workplace experience, whereas under the COS program, all apprentices get work experience. But why does this happen? If we look at the next point, Under your traditional approach, most students are selected by the college. So if I would like to do a qualification, as long as I meet the entrance requirements of the TVET college and the qualification, I can select to do that. Whereas with the COS program, the students are not selecting themselves into the college. What ends up happening is the employer will put out a call for applications. They are then employed by the employer. If they meet the employer's application requirements, they then get enrolled into the TVET college to do the apprenticeship training. So ultimately, the main relationship is between the employer and the apprentice. In the traditional approach, there are few linkages between the public TVET colleges and industry and employers, but given the way the COS program is designed to work, there's very close engagement between colleges and industry. If we look at why we're here, sorry, just one final point on this is that one of the main differences that we see between the traditional approach and the COS approach is that the traditional approach is supply driven. And if we were to put a name to the COS program, it would be more of a demand driven program. So this is why we're here today. As the DGG mentioned, we did a midterm evaluation of the Centre of Specialisation Programme. And the objective of this was to actually see where we are to date. What progress have we made? What lessons have we learned? And we did this by looking at the relevance and appropriateness of the programme, whether it's answering the right questions, whether it's been correctly designed to answer those problems, whether the programs are on track, what problems have we identified, where do we need to take corrective action, etc. And the overall objective was for us to inform the adjustments to the program for both the current cohort as well as future rollouts. Now, it's key to mention that we don't have a lot of time today, so we have focused on just the key main high-level findings for this discussion, but the detail of this is available in the synthesis report, which is available for anyone to read. So just to start with the theory of change of this program and how the program itself sees itself working. We know that in this particular case, the Centres of Specialisation Programme is aiming to address specific challenges, as we mentioned. And in order to address these, we have set ourselves 6 immediate outcomes that we need to achieve from this program. And these are the 6 purple blocks that are circled by this broken line or this dashed line. Very importantly, usually when you see a program, you'll see activities and outputs as well. But given the number of stakeholders that are involved in this program, there was a decision taken to give some level of freedom and flexibility to people who are actually implementing these programs and structures who are implementing these programs to do it in the way that they feel best, but also with some guidance from the oversight and management structures, which is why you won't see activities and outputs at this level. You'll be rather focused on the immediate outcomes. And these 6 immediate outcomes are quite important because they are the way that all the findings from the evaluation have been categorized. So the first immediate outcome that we were looking for was to make sure that we got the appropriate regulatory governance, funding, and management structures in place. As we mentioned, there's quite a number of different stakeholders. It's very important for us to make sure we have the structures right before we can actually get the program to work the way that we want. The second one is around learning and teaching and support materials. Because we changed the way that the program runs or works or is delivered from the traditional TVET system, there was a need for us to now have appropriate LTSMs for these particular trades. And that was the second thing that we needed to put in place. The third thing we needed to put in place was we needed to help TVET colleges to increase their capacity. And by capacity, we're talking about resources, we're talking about quality, etc. We needed to get them up to scratch. And the fourth one is that we needed employers to come to the party. We know that this is a dual system approach, which means that we not only need the college, you also need the employers. So were we able to, with this program, actually get employers on board, and are they able to adequately train apprentices? The fifth one is around SETAs being able to participate in the Centre of Specialisation. Your SETAs are very important in this space because they play a number of roles. They are part funder, in terms of the stipends that are paid to the employer for the apprentice. They are also important for workplace approvals, etc. And then the very last outcome that we needed to achieve is that we needed to have effective and efficient trade test centers, because as we said, this entire program culminates with the ASA, the External Integrated Summative Assessment, and for that you need an accredited trade test center. So these are the 6 things that we needed to do in order to get this program to work. If we can get these things in place, we expect that those apprentices that come out will have better knowledge and skills, they'll have better employability, they may go through the system faster, our TVET colleges will, our entire system actually, will be better placed to deliver apprenticeship training, and even our collaboration and coordination between all our different stakeholders would have improved. So I won't go through this in a lot more. I will talk to these 6 purple blocks as we go through the evaluation findings. So let's get into that. In terms of the evaluation findings, as I said, we're doing this in 3 different categories or criteria. We've got relevance and appropriateness, which is the first one. And this answers the question of to what extent has the design of the program, the Centre of Specialisation Programme, enabled the achievement of its intended objectives. And here we look at 2 separate components. The first one is relevance. Relevance is about the problem that we are trying to solve. When we went to design the Centre of Specialisation Programme, did we correctly identify the problems that we were trying to solve? And what the evaluation found was that the Centre of Specialisation Programme has been developed to address 3 correctly identified needs and challenges. And that's the key word, that we have correctly identified these. These 3 problems are interlinked, and you'll see that as I go through them now. And the key here is that the first problem that we're going to talk about is actually a result of number 2 and number 3. So let's get into them. The first thing is that, or the first need or the challenge that we need to address with this program is that there's a shortage of supply in the supply of suitably skilled and qualified artisans into the labor market. Well, in the NDP, we put out a target for 30,000 per year. We are actually falling short of that number, but that doesn't talk to the suitably qualified component of that. So not only are we below that, the quality of those artisans may not be up to scratch. And when we looked at the SIPs, as we said earlier, we did some research, we found that there were these gaps, and that is why we know that there is a shortage in supply. But what are the other 2 reasons that cause this shortage in supply? The first one is the poor quality of apprenticeship training and the resulting lower level of skill and competence of the artisan. If your quality of training is not up to scratch, because the resulting apprentices that come through the program are seen to have a lower level of skill and competence, they're not as employable, or they're not seen to be as employable. And what is some of the reasons for this? They touch on that traditional approach that we talked about earlier, where we're looking at outdated curricula, or curricula that are not aligned to industry needs, poor quality or inadequate infrastructure at TVET colleges to actually deliver apprenticeship training, uneven levels of trade expertise amongst teachers within the TVET colleges, and also little to no on-the-job learning exposure. But that's only one part of the challenge. The other part of the challenge is systemic weaknesses. And these are broader than just the TVET college. This is all the other aspects that we need to work in order for the COS program to be effective. And this also ties back into those 6 purple blocks in the theory of change. So what are some of these systemic weaknesses? The first one is a fragmented trade qualifications with no national oversight or coordination for a single trade. We know that some qualifications used to be overseen by the SETAs, which means that different SETAs would have different ways of doing things. We have weak monitoring and quality assurance of apprenticeship programs. As we said, not all programs were linked to competence, which meant that the quality assurance component wasn't as strong. We know that there were complicated registration systems for apprentices, leading to delays and employer frustrations, because the employer needs to register that apprentice and then go through a number of different administration requirements that could often lead to frustration. And then the last one in the systemic weaknesses was related to trade testing, where there were delays in getting the trade testing done. So these are all the challenge. These are the 3 correctly identified needs and challenges that the Centre of Specialisation Programme aims to address. So now that we've identified the problems, let us go and see if we've designed our solution correctly. And over here, we look at the design of the solution on paper first, in other words, in theory. And the reason that we do this is that oftentimes when we look at implementation challenges that we've encountered, some of them can be explained by weaknesses in the design of your program. And that's why we go back and we look at design first. There were 3 key findings over here. The first one is that the design of the Centre of Specialisation Programme is based on research, consultation, and previous pilots. We know that we've had 2 previous pilots done in the apprenticeship or artisan training within South Africa. It was the dual system apprenticeship pilot known as the DSAP and the dual system pilot project known as the DSPP. The learnings from these 2 pilots have been integrated into the COS program, and that's very important. We've also looked at what has been done globally in terms of best practice for artisan training, and that is where we've taken advice from international agencies such as the German Development Cooperation and the Japanese Cooperation Agency, as well as the British Council, so that we know that in terms of design process, our process that we followed is sound. The next finding that we have is that the COS program has been correctly conceptualized and designed. So we know that the COS program, if we look at, the commitment from the DHET's commitment was that they wanted to create a skilled and capable workforce to support inclusive economic growth, again, targeted at our triple challenge that we face. And if you look at the COS program and the way that it's designed, it answers directly to this commitment of the Department of Higher Education and Training. The third finding that we found under appropriateness looked at the project's objectives at an overall level and whether these program objectives were clear and commonly understood. And we found that it was. The project objectives are clear and commonly understood. They are relevant and realistic to the situation on the ground. They talk directly to the 3 challenges that we talked about in the previous slide. The theory of change that has been developed shows the various components in the program and how they need to work together. Again, those 6 purple blocks. And when we look at the 2 objectives that need to be achieved simultaneously, they've been summarized as 1 quantity objective and 1 quality objective. The quantity objective is focused on addressing the shortage of the suitable skills that we need, both for the SIPs as well as for the general labor market. And the quality objective is focused on building the capacity of the public TVET college system. And there's 3 key words in this sentence that I'd just like to stress. It's for the TVET college system to deliver specialized. So it's a center of specialization. It needs to be on track with all the latest developments within that trade, good quality, as in recognized good quality, and industry appropriate trade qualifications done in partnership with employer partners. So that's the key differences, and that's where the quality objective needs to get met. That's what we found under appropriateness and, relevance and appropriateness. And now if we look at efficiency, I do want to stress that the midterm evaluation has picked up a few inefficiencies that we're going to talk about today. And the key is that if those are not corrected or if they're left uncorrected, it could have an impact on the long-term outcomes and sustainability that we're trying to achieve. But I also need to stress that this doesn't take away from the considerable progress that has been made in designing and implementing this new approach. We have made a lot of progress. We will talk about that. We'll also talk about some of the challenges that we've encountered. And the reason we do that is it brings to mind those things that we need to focus on just a little bit more if we are to ensure the success of this program going forward. So if you think back to the purple blocks, the first purple block that we talked about was the appropriate regulatory and oversight and governance structures that we needed to have in place for this program to work. But I'd like to show you all the different role players that we currently have in this COS program and how each of them actually play a role in the success of this and why this oversight and management and implementation structures are so very, very important. If we look at the dotted line we have running horizontally, it separates between the oversight and management structures of this program and then the implementation aspects below. Your oversight and management is very much your Department of Higher Education branches and chief directorates. But in your work streams, they've actually made a conscious effort of bringing together different important organizations that need to play a role. So for example, with the trade testing, they've brought the QCTO into play. When it comes to monitoring and evaluation, GTAC has brought into play. When it comes to making sure that the link between oversight and management and actual implementation on the ground is strong, they've actually put together what we call occupational teams who create that bridge between oversight and management on the top of the dotted line and implementation at the bottom of the line. These occupational teams consist of a range of different stakeholders, at least one from industry, SETAs, TVET colleges, as well as trade test representatives. And the purpose is to bring them all into a room and for them to be able to manage this process. We do see that the occupational teams are currently being managed by industry associations. So these are the ones that are listed on this screen. If we look at the implementation aspect, and this is the day-to-day, delivery of this COS program, there are three key people that are three key institutions that are involved in this. It's your TVET college. They're responsible for theory and practicals, your employer who's responsible for workplace-based learning, and then your trade test center responsible for the ASA. But these are three separate organizations. So how do we bring them together? We've created at an implementation level a number of different structures that we also need. And the most important of these is seen to be the reference group, because that's where you bring together your TVET college, your employers, labor, industry, your occupational team conveners, your SETAs, even your student representative council, all around a table together so that we can have these discussions at implementation and ensure smooth implementation. So this is just a quick layout of who participates in the COS program, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we've gotten it right. So let's talk about some of the findings that we've actually found about this governance and management structures that we've put in place. So the first finding that we have under this is that there appears to be a slight disconnect between some of the parties who are participating in the COS program. And we will talk about this more and more as we go through the slides, because we do have a section for each of the different key stakeholders. But the key here is that our governance and management structures are established and they are operational. And this is at an oversight level and at a college level. But there are some challenges. We do feel, or we do see from the evaluation, that the governance structures sometimes are a bit too large. And when you have too many players, it makes collaboration and coordination very, very difficult. We do see that there are some stakeholders who have not allocated dedicated resources to this particular program. And the dedicated resources is important because for continuity, if you don't have dedicated resources and you have different people coming to meetings every month, it makes that continuity throughout the program quite difficult. We do think that there hasn't been enough consideration given to the autonomy of some stakeholders, especially those that are outside the Department of Higher Education and Training, or those that are mandated or have their own mandates. There's varying levels of success that has been achieved by the work streams, especially work stream 2, and we'll see that further down. Work stream 2 was responsible for the development of learning and teaching support materials, and we'll see some of the challenges that have been encountered in that. Also, there's a disproportionate number of trades assigned to some occupational teams. So if we saw on the previous slide, there's one occupational team that is actually responsible for 10 out of the 13 trades, and that is a disproportionate assignment, as well as the occupational teams being a temporary structure. They're not supposed to be there in the long term. They were set up for the first cohort to help to get everything in place, and eventually that would need to seed to other project managers within either the TVET colleges or the DHET itself. So that is a temporary structure which could threaten continuity. The second finding that we have under this immediate outcome is around the funding. So we have developed funding frameworks for all 13 trades, and for the pilot phase, which is the first cohort, the funding came from appropriations from the TVET branch. It came from a skills development levy from the National Skills Fund, as well as from the SETAs who provided the funding to the employers, as we mentioned. There are also some unseen costs which employers have contributed, and again, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but that is something that was not actually considered in the original model. This funding model is expected to change going forward. So we would expect the COS program, as it gets institutionalized, to be sourced from appropriations, skills development levies, and then the tax rebates. There are a number of tax rebates that government has put out, but there's also a number of questions in terms of the future of this program. If we do add additional colleges or additional trades, how would the CapEx expenditure be covered, for example? Employer contributions such as paying higher wages, how would that be considered? And then also that the budgeting that is done for the voted funds, which comes from the fiscus versus that comes from the skills development levy, are currently not planned together. So they plan separately. And that is a challenge because this particular program's success is dependent on both sources of funding. So those were the two key findings that we had under immediate outcome 1. If we go to immediate outcome 2, which was about appropriate learning and teaching materials, and we look at what are the key findings that we have over here, the first one is that we now have occupational qualifications in place for all 13 priority artisan trades in this program. All of them have been approved and accredited and are currently being used. I mentioned earlier that the sequencing of this particular COS approach is very, very important because we switch between theory, practical, and workplace-based experience in a sequenced and integrated way. And the National Occupational Curriculum Content Document, or the NOC document, is what has been developed to guide this. All 13 trades now have this document in order to guide that. But as I mentioned earlier, the importance of learning and teaching materials comes from the fact that we've made changes from the old approach. We've changed our curriculum to be more industry relevant. And because we did that, we needed to make sure that the learning and teaching material that's used in the TVET colleges by the facilitators, by the learners, and even in the workplace by the mentors was also updated. And we found that for some of the trades, this still hadn't yet been done. And there were some reasons that were given for this, especially around delays and bottlenecks in procurement processes, delays in sending out tenders, or an insufficient number of qualifying bids that actually came in response to those. Where the learning and teaching material has been developed, there were also a few concerns around it being misaligned to the NOC or the curriculum content sequencing document, some out-of-date information, etc., which has required a lot of effort to actually correct. And the way that this has been corrected and the solution that we came up with was to actually bring together material that was already in existence. So pulling from legacy qualifications, industry associations who have their own material, as well as SETA materials. But this has put an additional burden on facilitators, which makes it very difficult for them to actually do this. They need to put in quite a lot more time in order for them to be able to deliver this particular program. And the last learning under immediate outcome 2 was around facilitator and mentor development. We know that there's a balance that needs to be struck between the experience and the knowledge of facilitators that we bring into the program at college level. And for that reason, our facilitators need to be trained both on the content as well as on andragogical methods. And that refers to the way that we teach young adults. So it's very important that we actually do this training, but that training has been overlooked in the design of the Centre of Specialisation Programme, where we don't actually have a dedicated facilitator training program in place. What we have seen is that the German Development Corporation, as well as JICA, which is the Japanese cooperation agency, are working in some of the colleges on their own for some of the trades that they are focusing on. And they've extended that training that they are doing in their colleges to some of the trades within the COS program. But that is not a long-term solution. This is something that we will need to look at in the future. The same thing with the mentors within the employers. There is a big difference between a mentor and a supervisor. Mentorship is very structured. It's actually focused on the growth and development of apprentices. And for that reason, to assume that anyone in an employer is able to be a mentor would be incorrect. What we would need to do then is to make sure that those people are actually able to do that. The next outcome that we have is around capacity of TVET colleges to produce the artisans. And what we found over here is the key finding was that these 19 TVET colleges and 26 sites have been inducted into the Centre of Specialisation Programme, and they are participating. The quality of participation, however, is driven by the executive structure of your college. If you have good buy-in from your executive structure of your college, chances are that your Centre of Specialisation is going to succeed. We found less challenges in those colleges which had good executive buy-in and commitment. In terms of the structures that have been implemented at implementation level, as we mentioned earlier, there was a number of different structures that are put in place, the reference group being the most important one, seen to be the most valued. These structures have been put in place, but again, not without its challenges. We do find that the level of participation from some stakeholders in these groups have been found to be wanting, especially when it comes to consistent or dedicated capacity for continuity. The third finding over here was that TVET colleges have appointed Centre of Specialisation project managers. They work together with the OTCs to make sure that the program runs smoothly, as well as facilitators. Key here is that these project managers, while being appointed, aren't always working or fulfilling their role in the most efficient and effective way, and that is something that we need to look at. But one of the other challenges that was also encountered is this difficulty of finding and recruiting appropriately qualified and experienced facilitators. So getting that balance between knowledge and experience has been a little bit difficult. But for now, all TVET colleges do have the facilitators that they need in place. And the last finding with regard to TVET colleges is around the workshops. As we mentioned, there's a theoretical component as well as a practical component within the TVET colleges. And here there needed to be workshops established or, set up within these different TVET colleges. And we found that this has been done at 21 of the sites. So there are 5 sites that don't yet have these, but it hasn't been, again, without its challenges. Some of the challenges relate to procurement and the procurement guidelines and the application of that. The strict application of procurement guidelines is often interpreted to mean to take the cheapest quote that you get. But the cheapest quote for heavy machinery is not always the best quote to go for, given the quality of that machinery that you might get. And for that reason, there has been some inefficiencies when it comes to the procurement of equipment and infrastructure. There are some workshops that have been established but are not yet commissioned, as in other words, they are not yet up and running. And the last one is that, all of these learning and teaching materials were supposed to be hosted or held on tablets and laptops that were to be given to the apprentices. We do see some challenges that have been encountered on the non-suitability of those devices that have been procured. This is a risk. The practical component is a very strong component of this program. It's one of the 4 key components that we mentioned earlier, and therefore this is a risk to the program itself. The 4th slide relates to employers and their participation in the program. Key over here is that we see employers have committed to the Centre of Specialisation Programme where we have been able to find them. We did run into a little bit of a challenge in terms of finding employers in the rural areas because the smaller employers that were there didn't necessarily meet the requirements that would have been set up by the SETAs for funding. The lead and host employer model has been very, very important because it's allowed these smaller employers then to participate, but that model also has a few challenges, especially around the ownership of the relationship. If you've got a lead and host employer model, your host employer has got no relationship with the COS program directly. They have a relationship with the lead employer. The lead employer then has a relationship with the COS program. So that also needs to be clarified if we see this as a long-term solution to the program. There were some challenges raised around workplace approval and around the commitment of SETAs to the approval process. And this was manifested or explained through the unclear and non-standardized workplace approval criteria and guidelines, some inefficient processes and systems, as well as insufficient capacity from the SETAs to actually deliver on these workplace approvals. Again, a risk to the program as the employers and the workplace-based learning is key to the success of this program. In terms of the inconsistencies around mentorship, as I mentioned earlier, there's a key difference between mentorship and being a supervisor. Your supervisor tends to just oversee work as usual, whereas the mentorship is a dedicated way of developing an apprentice. We do see that there are some employers who have not appointed mentors, and that shows a slight misunderstanding from their side as to the purpose of mentorship. Some of the employers also see mentorship as a cost to the company because that is time that the mentor needs to spend with the apprentice, which they see as a lost cost. And then in terms of apprentice wages, we see that the wages that are paid are regulated, but it's not standardized. So for those employers that are part of bargaining councils, they often need to pay a slightly different minimum stipend, which is higher than that which has been set out. There is a way to get around this in terms of an exemption, but that requires engagement with the Department of Labour for the future of the Centre of Specialisation Programme. Seamus, I've got 2 slides left.
Great.
Okay, thank you. The 5th outcome is around SETAs, and there was one main overall finding that we found with regard to the SETAs and their participation in the COS. And this comes back to that very first slide that we did about the institutional framework, where we said that not enough consideration has been given to the autonomous nature of some organizations. And this comes through because when we look at the way that SETAs are participating in the Centre of Specialisation Programme, and again, there are some SETAs that have done well, and there are others that have done poorly, but we are just focusing on the overall findings. We find it's a fragmented landscape, very levels of commitment, inconsistent processes and criteria for workplace approvals, and even for grant funding applications and disbursement. There's different ways that different SETAs do things, and this has created quite a lot of confusion. We did unpack this a bit with both the TVET branch and the skills branch. And what we found is that the skills branch sees this as the normal job of a SETA. It's their job, it's their mandate to fund this sort of training. So it's not actually something new. But what has happened is when we sat down with SETAs and spoke to them, some of them see this as a special project, not part of their original mandate. And for that reason, we have this differing levels of interpretation. In terms of the way the SETAs perceive themselves, they see themselves as having a good working relationship with each other. But what we actually find when we speak to outside people who work with the SETAs very closely, they see this as very different. They see the landscape as being quite fragmented and siloed, and not a lot of information and learning sharing going on between the SETAs. So that is something that we need to address because of the key role that the SETAs do play in this entire program, from workplace approvals to the registration of contracts, of the apprenticeships down to the disbursement of funding. It's very, very important that we get this relationship correct. And then the last immediate outcome and the findings that we have with regard to this is around the trade test centers. So as I mentioned earlier, Workstream 8, which is on the trade test centers, is responsible for this. It wasn't part of the original design of the program. It came in at a later date when it was identified as a challenge. But in this, we found two key findings. The first one is that because this is a competence-based program, there's phase assessments, internal assessments, and the ASO, the external assessment that needs to be done. And this hasn't actually been developed for all the trades just yet. Cohort 1 is still underway, we know that. But when we look at the phase assessments and internal assessments, which are these stepping stones as an apprentice goes through the program, we see that the facilitators may not have the knowledge or the skills needed to develop these, and they need a little bit of support to get that done. When it comes to the ASA or the trade tests, we see that it's only been developed for 4 of the trades so far. There are still 9 trades for which the ASA test still needs to be developed. So this is an area that we need to put a little bit more focus to. And then if we look at the trade test facilities themselves that we need, there was an original idea that there are a number of trade test centers already in South Africa, that we can use these in order to deliver these trade test centers, use these, get them up to scratch, accredit them, and then use them as the trade test centers. But this has been found to be unfeasible, simply because these existing trade test centers don't actually have the specialized equipment. Again, these are centers of specialization. So they don't actually have the specialized infrastructure, equipment, and tools that are needed. So for us to use those trade test centers would be very, very difficult. And now there's discussions being held and consideration is being given to actually accredit the Center of Specialization at the TVET college itself. That workshop has been built. The capital expenditure has been put out. And then to avoid any conflicts of interest or any challenges that could arise, to then have independent assessors come in, use the same infrastructure, but have an independent assessor. So those are the 6 key immediate outcomes. If we look at the overall findings, we do think that progress is being made in improving the overall capacity of TVET colleges, which is great. A few challenges to iron out, but at an overall level, quite good. In terms of our collaboration and coordination amongst our stakeholders, we do have some successes with stakeholders being very involved, challenges with others as mentioned, and that is something that we need to address. In terms of the delivery of the apprenticeship training, the assumption is that we would, or the expectation, sorry, is that given the way this program has been designed, it should improve the delivery of apprenticeship training. And the last outcome, which is around knowledge, skills, and competency, or the overall employability of the apprentice. Unfortunately, our first cohort is still underway, so we don't have enough data to give us a conclusive answer on that. Thank you very much, Seamus.
Thanks very much. Sadeka, that was, I thought that was an excellent presentation, and I'm always incredibly surprised at just how much information you managed to get through. So thank you. That was a great presentation. We're going to move on immediately now, and basically I'm briefly going to introduce Dr. James Keavy. He's the chairperson or chief executive officer, I beg your pardon, of DHET Education Services. And basically has a long history of working in SACPO. He does a lot of both national, African and international research as well. And without any further ado, I'm going to let James do the Mentimeter exercise, I think it is. Lance.
Thank you, Seamus. Much appreciated. Colleagues, good morning, and all protocols observed. I think my job is quite simple today. It's to do an exercise together with all of us. We're quite a big group today, so it's actually quite difficult for us to involve everybody, but what we're going to do in the next 10 or 15 minutes is involve you in an exercise where we really want to hear your views. The easiest way to do this is to use your phone, but you can also do it on your computer. Let's just take 10, 15 minutes and do this together. So I'm going to guide you through the exercise. If you watch my screen on the Zoom, I'm going to help you a little bit just how to do this. So I'm going to put some voting instructions for you on the screen. If you use an iPhone, this is quite easy. Turn on your camera, hold it over the QR code, and you're going to be at the right place. If you're using an Android phone, you can do the same thing depending on the apps on your phone. And if you use neither, you also use the URL. So the URL will be www.menti.com. It'll ask you for a number. And maybe I can just ask somebody, Patrick or somebody, just to put this, this URL and code in the chat as well of the Zoom. Then people can follow it there. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to join me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to my next. What you will see at the top of my screen, URL will remain, as well as the number. So if you're joining us a little bit late, you can still follow. At the bottom of my screen, after you start joining, I need you to press one of those little symbols there, a heart or a thumbs up. There's a thumbs down. We don't like thumbs down, but you can use a thumbs down or a little cat or something or a question mark. We're over 150 people on the call. So I'm going to encourage everybody, panel, chairpersons, everybody to please join us. And you will see as people start joining, the numbers at the bottom of my screen will increase. And I'm not going to rush this. I'm just going to remind you again how you can do this. You can either go to the URL on a browser, menti.com, and then the code is 73907248. If you want to do it on your phone, I will briefly go back to that code for anybody who might be running a little bit late. But I'm just going to onboard you just so that I don't rush this too much, and we can try and see how many people we can get onto this exercise. It's going to take about 10 minutes once we're all on. Okay, we're getting there. We're on about 4 people, slowly but surely getting there. I'm going to put the QR code back again. Anybody who wants to use the QR code, I'm going to put it back for you in case that's an easier route for you. Just open your camera on your phone, take the QR photo, and it will take you directly to the place we will be. But of course, you can do this via the Menti as well. I can see your hand. Can you just do it on the chat, please? We're not going to take questions right now because we have quite a big group, but we'll help you on the chat. Okay, colleagues, I'm just going to wait a little bit more. I need at least a few more people. Come on, guys, I need to challenge you. Please join us. Right at the top of my screen is the URL, and then the code is also there, 73907248. It's really important that we hear all your views. I know it's nice in these webinars to multitask and do other things. We need you back with us now for 10 minutes, please. A few more minutes. You can join us at any point as I go along, but it's ideal if we start together. Okay, looking good. We're just kind of getting close on halfway. I want to get to 2/3 at least before we go ahead. Please press one of those little icons. Then it's easy for me to see whether you're with me. Just emphasize the exercise we're going to do now is anonymous. So whatever you're going to represent or respond to will not be attributed to your name or your constituency. So do not be concerned. It's a completely anonymous exercise. It just gives us a little bit of a sense before we go into the panel session that Gerda will be chairing in a few minutes. It helps us just to get a sense what the views of people that are on the call now. Okay, looking good. I'm going to wait for another 5 to 10 people, then I'm going to get going. Colleagues, please join us. Just the last time I'll tell you, at the top of my screen, the URL, menti.com, and the code 73907248. All right, let's go. So the first question I'm going to ask you, what type of organization do you represent? So on your screen, you'll have an option to indicate. You can choose more than one. So what you can do, if you're on your phone, it's nice because you can watch my screen on the Zoom plus your phone. But of course, you can do this in any way that suits you best. Okay, looking good. A lot of people from the TVET colleges, which is always good. Okay, government, quite a few. TVET college is by far the strongest group. A couple of research agencies, a couple of other international development agencies could help us. SETAs a little bit low, eh? We've got 4 SETAs so far, but I don't have any on the Mentimeter yet. It's getting there. If you're not on the Mentimeter, you can still join colleagues, at the top of my screen is the joining instructions, and you can also ask on the chat if you need anybody to help us. Okay, I think that's looking quite good. SETAs a little bit low, employers a little bit low, definitely a really good representation from the TVET colleges. I think this is great. Okay, let's do the next question. Okay, this question is, the COS program has had the following impact. You saw Zoe's presentation a couple of minutes ago, and she spoke to a lot of these things, but we want to ask your views. Firstly, you'll see you've got a scale, not improved to improved, left to right. First one is about the capacity of the TVET colleges. Has it improved? Has the COS program improved the capacity of TVET colleges or not? Second one, the implementation delivery of the apprenticeship training. Third one, coordination between stakeholders. And then the last one, employability of apprentices. Apologies for the typo in the last one. I see that's my fault. So please express your view. Let's just get a sense what everybody on the calls is on these 4 points. You can still join us if you haven't been able to join us so far. Employability is always a difficult thing to manage, and to attribute any program really to employability is always tricky. And I think you could see that from the evaluation results that Zoe presented. Not looking too bad on capacity. It's a key part of our sector and the work that we need to do at the moment. It's interesting, stakeholder collaboration came out in the findings as something that needed a bit more work. So it's interesting that it's actually one of the highest from the group today. Okay, but very interesting. Okay, let's do one more. There's seven key recommendations from the report that Zoe presented. We're asking you to rank these recommendations in your view. It helps DHET as it goes forward with the COS program, with colleges, employers, and teachers, to get a sense from you as a community, which of these are the most important for you. This is a bit more of a delicate exercise if you're doing it on your phone. Give us a sense by prioritizing these recommendations. And it's really important for us to see from the group. I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do that. No music now. Seamus, I'm pretty much on time, so you don't have to be concerned. I'll be done in the next 3 minutes.
Thanks, James.
It takes a little bit more time to kind of express your view on, so I just want to give you a chance to finish it. Kind of most important one so far is kind of process between the SETAs. I think this is a big issue in our country, and it's far beyond the COS program. This is a real issue in terms of consistency of processes, and where training providers have a lot of duplication of effort and lines that they have to adhere to, sometimes contradictory. I think the panel that'll come on now might talk a little bit more about this. Okay, second one so far is about the collaboration again. I think that's useful. It's interesting, the funding is quite low. I'm expecting the panel probably to talk a bit more about the funding, Gerda, when you guys come on. Okay, it's interesting. The streamlining one is staying at the top, and we've got a quite large number of the votes in so far. Just a reminder, anybody who still wants to join, like a last chance, right at the top, I feel like auctioning something. Right at the top, there's a URL and a code if you still want to join us. Okay, very interesting. Actually, I wasn't expecting this, to be honest. Okay. I'm just going to give another 30 seconds or so if anybody still hasn't submitted. But I think this is quite interesting results. And I mean, Gerda, Mustak, I think for your panel, this is going to be an interesting entry into your panel. Okay, colleagues, a last question. And this is really looking at the future of the COS program. Before we finish today, Sabela is going to talk about this just before we finish at 12 o'clock. So the 4 points are on the future. The dual system methodology is just like working, and we need to really push it in. Do you agree? The role clarity of the dual system methodology in particular. So firstly, is it a preferred model? And secondly, is the role clarity there? And then the third one on the OTCs, they're working, they must be retained. And then just the last point, just a general point, do you support this? And do you think it's something that DHET must take forward? Okay, I'm just going to give another few minutes. I think it's very positive. I suppose we all converted on the call today, but it's important. This is an initiative, a flagship initiative of DHET, and it's good to see the kind of support that we're getting. Seamus, can I maybe ask you just to do a video, then I'll start easing you in as well. Okay, a few more votes to go. I think we've got to be frank around this kind of stuff. I think the role clarity is the one that needs the most work, even though it's got a relatively high score. It's definitely something that look at in a bit more detail. All right, colleagues, thank you so much for participating. We had over half participating, which is not bad. And for the rest of you, next time we're going to be on your case. We need you to do this, but thanks, that was quite useful. Okay, back to you, Seamus.
Thanks, James. I remain impressed with your use of technology. It was a really interesting exercise. Thank you. So great, we're moving straight on into a moderated panel now. And so I'm just going to very briefly introduce the participants, and hopefully their cameras will all come on. So basically just the person who will be effectively moderating this panel is Ms. Gerda Magnus. She is the Chief Director in the TVET branch of the DHET. It's also useful just to mention that she's a founding member of this entire Centres of Specialisations project. Thanks. Great. Then we're going to move on to Mr. Naftali Mokotsane. Thanks very much. So he basically started a career as a motor mechanic, which is fantastic. Anyway, through an apprenticeship at BMW SA plant in Roslyn. He worked for 6 years at Tshwane North TVET College as a lecturer for mathematics, science, and mechanical subjects. He then worked at Indlela as an automotive section head for 3 years. He then joined MoSETA, a manufacturing and engineering related services SETA, as a quality assurer in 2005 and progressed to the manager quality assurance and is now a senior manager for quality assurance and partnerships. He has extensive experience in skills development, quality assurance of learning, and implementation of projects. He's got a postgraduate diploma in business management and is currently studying a master's in business administration. Thanks. Great. And then morning, Mr. Mustaq Ali. Thanks very much for being here. Mr. Ali is currently the head of skills development at the Minerals Council, South Africa. He has more than 25 years experience in the holistic HR value chain. He currently represents mining and broader business on several national, provincial, and sectoral authorities, councils, and boards. Amongst others is the Human Resource Development Council of South Africa, the National Skills Authority, and the Quality Council for Trades and Occupations. He's also a board trustee on the Sentinel Pension Fund and the deputy chair of the BUSA Subcommittee on Education and Training. Through the Minerals Council, he works engages with work at the Mandela Mining Precinct, focusing on the South African mining, extraction, research, development, and innovation strategy, and is also leading the Mining Skills 4 project that focuses on skills development and the future of work in mining. He's co-chair of the Skills Initiative Working Group at the International Council of Mining and Metals. And just a final note there is that he regards himself as an active citizen of people development in South Africa and subscribes to the pursuit of poverty alleviation, eradication of inequality, and gainful employment of all South Africans. Thanks, Mr. Adam. Great. Then basically, hello, Ms. Zandile Nkabendi. Thank you very much for being here. Basically, Ms. Nkabendi she started her career as a lecturer at a technical college in 1995. So that goes back a little while there. She's been appointed as a campus manager at Majuba College in 2005. In 2013, she was promoted to the position of the Deputy Principal, Academic Services in the same college, and is still currently holding that position. She's led a college team, which established the Student Placement Unit at the college in 2013, a unit which is now well established and making a significant contribution in facilitating student work placement in industry. She's also a pioneer in lecturer placement in industry, which has resulted in a few college lecturers qualifying as artisans. She's also served in a number of DHET-led initiatives, just to mention a few. She serves as a member of the Open Learning Materials review team for the Advanced Diploma in TVET and the Subject Expert Group. She's also been a facilitator for the professional development of TVET campus managers. Thank you very much, Zinkemen. Great. And I think we'll just leave it there. Thanks very much. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Seamus. Good afternoon, or morning actually, to all our participants in the webinar this morning, and then a special good morning to our panel members. So we are going to have a little bit of a conversation about some of the findings that has just been presented. Of course, we can't go into everything, but I'll pick on a few issues and ask a couple of questions, and yeah, let's get some of the views and perspectives, of our panel members. But before we get to that, I'm going to ask each one of our panel members to give us a quick 5 minutes or so, synopsis or idea from your perspective about the review, about the Centres of Specialisation, and then from there we'll get into a little bit of a conversation and some questions and answers. So do you mind that I use your first names? Mustaq, Ali, Mustaq, may I start with you for your 5-minute input?
Heather, you can call me anything you want to, as long as the message is the same.
Okay.
So thank you very much, and let me say good morning firstly to DDG. I'm not sure if he's still with me. And yes, I'll say it once again, I am not BUSA. I am a member of BUSA. My occupation is at the Minerals Council South Africa, which is formerly the Chamber of Mines. And yes, we do meet each other on many platforms when I am wearing my BUSA hat representing broader business. Yeah, and let me say good morning to all the other colleagues. I see a few familiar names and faces in the platform as well, and it's great to see you online as well. So let me firstly say, we really, from my side, I would really welcome the report and appreciate the findings and recommendations that have been made in it. And let me say, it's not often that you get a very frank and detailed report to the extent that we've received this midterm review, even with all of its challenges. So, welcome that. And then just go on to say, maybe in a general sense, that I'm speaking to you this morning when the South African unemployment rate at the moment is running well in excess, I think, of 34.5 or 35, closer to 35. And if you look at the expanded definition, then you're looking at running at more at 44% unemployment. And let's not even go to look at the youth between the age of 15 and 24, because that's sitting closer towards, between 65 and 70% in terms of unemployed. So, to say that we have a youth unemployment crisis is an understatement, and that's, I guess, what makes COS really important, and the success of COS really important. I think, earlier on when Zuleika gave her overview, she spoke about even the sentiment that higher education versus your TVET education. It's like TVET is always looked through as being a weaker type of education, yet it is the one channel that's going to assist us with the challenges that we have in the employment space and in the unemployment space. So, when one looks at the Centres of Specialisation, and I've said this on a few platforms before, I think it has enormous potential to grow and to be able to service industry in the way that it should. But I guess, those broad statements are not what I'm here to speak about today, and it's more about the midterm research and review. And I've said that the COS has got great potential to deliver quality artisan development, and I think it comes through in the research as well. And more specifically, when one starts looking at all the things that have already been put in place and some of the successes that are found in it. Yes, I also believe that some work should be done on how we can get to expand COS beyond these engineering and boat trades. I think someone earlier on in the chat box spoke about, the pandemic has changed the way we view artisanal skills and the skills that we need in the future. It has changed the way that delivery has to happen in these kind of spaces. And I saw Dr. Prinsloo is also on the call, and I know he's a big fan of re-looking how artisan development actually starts taking place. So I think we need to look at how we change the way we do artisan development, as well as looking beyond just to engineering and build environments. I understand it came through because of SIPs. And unfortunately, you know, in terms of the 19 SIPs programs that we've had, not all of them have kicked off in a great flurry. And unfortunately, it's due to the economic constraints we had. So, you know, one appreciates the fact that you need to look beyond those kind of things in the research. I think I spoke about the candidness of it. I think one of the things that I would have liked to see in the research report is to see what was the sentiment out there and how thorough is the understanding of what COS is about. Because I think once again, Floris put in the chat box, it's about advocacy, marketing, and communication. And I felt that that was something that we really need to strengthen. I mean, I don't want to pick on this webinar, but when James ran the survey and you looked at the participants, I mean, 50% of them are probably TVET. SETAs and employers, extremely underrepresented. Now, I'm not too sure how that communication and marketing was done, but I think that's some of the places that we need to look at. I would have liked the research to look at that component as well, because in terms of those stakeholders that were spoken to, there was buy-in and acceptance of it. I like the fact that, you know, they spoke about the facilitator and mentor development. I think that's a big part. I also like the part that we need to look at the OTCs, and I'm sure it'll come up in a discussion later in the panel, and look at that role and how do we manage it through. And I think we, you know, overall for us, you know, the question is, what are some of the big issues that we feel need to be really highlighted or really should be pulling through? I think the biggest challenge for me is resources at the TVET. And when I talk resources, I'm not talking just lecturers. We're talking resources in terms of equipment, machinery, your lecturing capability, your project management capability, your financing capability, etc. So, you know, and of course, the one thing that did come up, I think, as well in the discussions was around stipends and wages. And I think Zuleka spoke about exemptions, you know, through the bargaining council. I remember a while back having raised this conversation with the then DG to say we perhaps need to look at how we define artisans so we can move away from this disparity about wages and stipends, because it does create problems and it does create hopping in terms of, you know, learners moving from one employer to the other, and you have all kinds of challenges in that. Khada, I'm going to leave those as my opening remarks. Otherwise, you know me, I could speak for hours on this aspect, but thank you.
Super. Thank you very, very much, Mustak. I think you've already raised a couple of issues for us to think about. And certainly, as we continue the conversation, we'll touch on some of those again. I'm going to move straight ahead to our next panelist, Ms. Zandile Nkabinde. Zandile, please give us your 5-minute sort of impressions about the project, about the review, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerda. Good morning to all of you delegates. I'll be sharing a perspective from a TVET college in Newcastle, Majuba College, that is participating in the boiler making COS. In our view, the review will assist in informing the policy direction in occupational programs. Also, challenges and bottlenecks identified that will impede on effective and efficient implementation will be addressed. Coming from a TVET college myself, I know that our colleges are not seen to be fully responsive to the skill shortages required by the economy. Whilst there is pockets of excellence observed in some of our TVET colleges, the reality out there is that some of our youth still do not recognize our colleges as their first choice. So this midterm review provides a constructive opinion on how the COS program has performed thus far in preparation for possible expansion of the project. We believe that the success of the COS program is highly dependent on the support from senior management and governance structures before it extends to other stakeholders. In my view, the COS was able to address the following, to mention a few. Capacity development of staff within colleges to make skills development fit for purpose, as they were trained in line with the industry requirements. And we also observed that the college industry partnerships were also established during this period. And also going forward, this will allow for more and existing partnerships being strengthened to ensure that there is an industry demand-led approach that is sustainable within TVET. The curriculum that was developed to meet the skills of the South African economy, there's been huge outcry, as I mentioned earlier, that we're not responsive enough. And we feel that our institutions are strategically placed to make skills development fit for purpose. So this COS has given us an opportunity to change this glimpse picture and reposition ourselves in order to be the leaders in the skills revolution. Just to mention a few recommendations to us, which we felt were important to consider. Going forward, there should be ring-fence funding for occupational programs in order to allow sustainability of the program, because we might find a situation that some of us TVETs might fail to build up reserves in future. So if we are going to expand this program, we need to have a fund that is secured for it. Also, we felt that there should be more advocacy on the COS project to industry so that we expand further on college industry partnership. We found that there were still employers that are not aware of the COS, its role and the benefits for them as industry. Also, consideration should be made for small business to participate on the project. The other highlights that I want to just consider in the interest of time, the issues of project management. In some of TVETs, including ours, we had assigned the role to an existing manager, which is a campus manager. And remember now, this is over and above the other duties that he is performing. So if we are going to expand and introduce more trade, it's gonna be too much for the person. And if we want to make sure that this project succeeds, we must consider a model where we appoint dedicated project managers to focus on the COS project. The other issue is the COS facilitators that we have currently in the COS that is running. We need to ensure that we provide job security for them, because we might lose this expertise that we have capacitated in order to deliver on the COS, as currently they are appointed on a 3-year contract. We do understand that this was an initial project, but going forward, we must provide sustainability. The issue of learning materials was a big hiccup for us, of course. And going forward, let us consider ensuring that we prepare and develop the materials well in advance, so that when we are supposed to commence with training, we are not delayed with procurement issues relating to learning materials. In conclusion, the recommendations cited in the review are constructive, and if considered, will support future expansion of the COS project. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zandile, for those inputs. And I can already see, even just in those opening remarks, you know, there are some common themes popping up already. You know, the whole issue of advocacy, getting more business involved, and that sort of thing. All right, but before I get into the meat of it, Naftali Mokutsane, sir, we would really like to hear a SETA perspective, you know, on this as well. MERSETA is, of course, one of the SETAs that are, you know, quite busy in the artisan development space. Naftali, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, colleagues. All protocol observed. I'm from MERSETA, which is obviously one of the SETAs that implements a lot of apprenticeships because of the, you know, the type of industry that we are facilitating skills development for. And obviously I'm standing here as a proud artisan, though I can't afford my own services anymore, so I outsourced the repair of my vehicle. You know, I think, you know, looking at the report, it's highlighting the key issues that we really need to think of when we talk of the decade of the artisan objectives, because, you know, with the SETAs taking over from the industry training boards, somehow the introduction of learnerships, you know, put the advocacy on learnerships, and, you know, people thought of apprenticeships are going to die, and therefore the intake also dwindled. And however, it was purely because of how, you know, the learnerships advocacy was pushed. And it therefore, fortunately, from MERSETA's perspective, we still continued with the advocacy of apprenticeships in order to get our artisans. What went wrong, you know, in terms of poor quality of apprenticeships, we found a lot of what we call recognition of prior learning, people coming into, you know, the artisan development field, to a point where, you know, the quality then sort of dropped because people felt from their own experience, therefore they do qualify for recognition as artisans. And I think that, you know, looking at the recommendations, you know, there are a few that obviously strikes me, which we need to consider, because there is a funding issue that talks to a true cost of training of an artisan. And we, you know, obviously going forward, this is a midterm, so I would think going forward, we need to consider the return on investment of having an apprentice in the workplace. Because, you know, we've tested that, you know, you can get return on investment from an apprentice from, you know, towards the end of the first year and second year. The other issue I want to also highlight is the NOC, National Occupational Curriculum Content. Yes, it helps with the sequencing and the delivery of training, but, and therefore, you know, the introduction of the dual system. But what's key here is, will it meet the requirements of the workplace from the employer perspective? Because I'm of the opinion that there has to be an agreed upon approach on, you know, the dual system. It shouldn't then be rigid in terms of how the NOC sequences. And I've also, you know, I would want perhaps as this, you know, evaluation continues, maybe that issue of, are we, you know, dropouts are given. The throughput will not be 100%. Now we need to find out whether somebody who completes this program, will they really have something to show in case they drop off after 2 years, you know? So that's a very critical thing for us. Facilitator training, mentorship training, it's very important. And yes, this we started as a pilot, and it's something that we will obviously have to focus on, you know, having picked up this in the report, and we proudly implementing 10 of the 13 trades from a SETA perspective, and we are obviously funding our own employers. I picked up in the report that it could be an issue that SETA, I mean, employers that are not affiliated to a SETA would not get grant funding, but yes, we also have our regulations. And on the last note, I just want to stress that yes, standardization of processes will be very important, and it needs a higher level coordination. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for those comments. I think there's quite a few issues in there that you know, we can also now touch on as we continue our discussion. In fact, there's too many things to discuss for the time allocated to us. But nevertheless, let's jump right in and you know, just get the conversation going. So I would like to start with this issue of occupational teams. In the Mentimeter exercise we did, it came out at about a 7, I think, the importance of occupational teams. My view, you know, they bring some industry relevance. Zandile, you were talking about responsiveness. Perhaps the occupational teams are helping with that. But are colleges placing too great a reliance on the occupational teams? You know, I don't know. So let me give to you, Zandile, maybe just, you know, some thoughts on the occupational teams. Are they really important, and do they need to be a standard feature, you know, as we move along?
Thank you, Gerda, for that question. I must actually agree that when we started off the project, the OTCs were quite important for us, because remember, we were moving in new territory, and they had a lot of experience with dealing with industry and different stakeholders. We found them quite useful in a lot of areas, even when we were running interviews for facilitators. They were bringing in a perspective in terms of what industry requires. Even though with us at TVET, there are certain criterions that we follow when we appoint lecturers, but we needed to integrate that. Now we are not just focusing on theory, but we are also, you know, doing practical, fit for purpose. So in our view, we feel they were quite useful, and they are still required now, because even the bottlenecks we had in resolving issues with DHET, they came at the forefront and step in to assist us as a college. So going forward, short-term to mid-term, yes, we require them. Even if we expand the COS, we'll still require them. But we are hopeful that in time, over the years, we'll have built sufficient capacity in terms of transfer of skills for TVETs to be able to run on their own in the long term. Thank you.
Okay, super, thank you. Mustak, I'm going to pose more or less the same question to you around the occupational teams. I mean, you spoke earlier about marketing. One of our occupational teams, actually, conveners is out of CIFSA. It's an employer body. So the occupational teams also gives us a sort of another foot in the door of bringing employers on board. I don't know. What is your view on the occupational teams?
Yeah, let me give you my view and the Minerals Council view, not necessarily a full employer view. But you know, in the report, we spoke about the dependency on the OTC, and unless I've read it wrong, that OTC is being in place actually means success at certain colleges or sites. So for me, all straight off the bat, do we need the OTCs? Yes, we do. And what do we need them for? We need them for various things. Let's not forget the COS program started in 2018. And of course, we had a whole lot of feeding programs around lectures, material, equipment, et cetera, and you know, you needed the OTCs to manage that process through for you as well. And then of course, we were hit by COVID. So, you know, when you really look at COS, is it really a fully established program at the moment? No, it's in its infancy. And it still has to grow, it needs to expand, it needs to look at beyond engineering and build environments. And I think if you're trying to do that and you're really trying to ramp up TVET capability, as much as I believe, yes, you need the TVETs to be able to, have their own structure in place to be able to do that. But I ask myself the question, how long before that can happen? In fact, what I see, and this is purely my opinion, at a later stage, you need to have permanency to the OTC, not just for the fact that they've helped you start off the program, but to ensure that the wheels keep on turning. Let the lecturers lecture. Let the trainers facilitate and do what they have to and carry on with that aspect. And let your OTC drive the engine room in terms of the administration, the marketing, the lobbying, the advocating, and when new things are coming in to actually implement those as well. Yes, we may be limited in terms of fiscal resources and whatever, but that OTCs are actually critical to the success of these kind of programs. And we've seen evidence of it. So yes, I understand the TVETs have been dependent on them purely because we had nothing else. Do we need something like that going forward? Yes, we do. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. In fact, so what I'm hearing you say, it's not only about potentially short and medium term, but perhaps even a longer term and a permanent feature that somehow we factor occupational team role into the system overall. Okay, super. Thanks, Mustak. So I'm going to move on to a sort of a next topic. Maybe they're slightly related, and that is the issue of lead and host employers. So what we had in the COS is a variety. We have where a student is directly contracted to an employer, but then we also have a case where there's a sort of a lead employer that onboards the students, but then places them at host employers. And so, there's different models in terms of that. So sticking with you for the moment, Mustak, do you think one model is preferred above the other? What are the potential benefits of having the sort of host lead employer situation?
Heather, thank you very much, and thanks for the question. And maybe just to start off by saying, we need to train and develop up 30,000 artisans per annum. And, we got to ask ourselves, will we have that capability just purely at looking at lead employers and lead employers taking on these artisans? And quite honestly, my opinion is that we just don't have enough lead employers that are prepared to take on these artisans. So, very briefly answering that question, do we need both? Yes, we do. Because the lead and host employer, instead of just going direct to employer, the lead and host employer model, what it allows you to do is that, and I think Naftali, I'm not too sure if Naftali had mentioned it, but what it could possibly allow you to do is if you have a lead employer that is registered to a SETA, I am hoping that that lead employer can also place your artisan at an employer who may not necessarily be at that specific SETA. I hope the system allows that, because then you're not constrained by this administration nightmare or bureaucracy that prevents an employer that's not registered at MERSETA to be able to train and develop an artisan. The lead employer model might allow you to do that. Further to that, and I'm not too sure, excuse my ignorance, whether it's being done at this stage, and I've mentioned it previously. If you have a lead employer, and let's say you have a collective of host employers, especially in the SMME environment, you could have SMME 1 delivering one component of the apprenticeship, SMME 2 delivering the second component, SMME 3 delivering the third component. Because what you have is the smaller companies may not be able to offer everything in terms of their apprenticeship, but they might be able to offer a part of it. The lead and host capability gives you that. And I'd like to see some kind of innovation for that to actually become a more bigger thing, because then you'll be able to start targeting SMMEs to join this process. So, coming back to, do we need lead and host employer, or do we need just direct employer? I think we need all of it, because, I mean, the challenge is just so big and the numbers are just so great. And of course, you've heard the minister say, he wants to make every workplace a learning space. And how better to do it by maximizing every opportunity, whether it's small, medium, or even your bigger corporate organizations. Thanks, Gerda.
Great, thank you. So it's about the scope that the smaller providers deliver, and if you have a lot of them together, then you can sort of rotate learners or whatever the case might be. So Naftali, while contracting with employers is a SETA thing, let me come to you and say, some years ago, we attempted to have ESDA, the Employment Skills Development Agencies. It was sort of an idea, lead employer idea or concept. What is your view? I mean, I completely agree with Mushtaq. The more employers we can bring on board, the better. How do the SETAs feel about that? Is it a possibility? Your take on it.
Thank you. Yes, as MESETA, we probably is because most of the staff members have been long in the skills development. So we are very familiar with the Employment Skills Development Agency model. And we've kind of embraced it in a sense that in the last funding window, actually it's the end of 2020 funding window, we were soliciting applications on this particular model. So therefore, it's a very workable model. It worked in the past. However, probably we didn't do a proper evaluation of what went wrong when it was run by the department. Probably it was funded by EU, that's why it ended. But we never had a transition for SETAs to sort of adopt it. However, the model of using lead employers also serves the same purpose. If you look at the final product that a lead employer does, and also what an employment skills development agency would do, it's a similar goal. So yes, we do want to it to be considered, and we are embracing it as a SETA. Maybe back to the comment from my fellow panelist, Mushtaq. We've started considering allocating grants to the COS center itself, the TVET, whereby we say, we are allocating the grant to you, go and source employers, whether they belong to MESETA or not. What we are very careful of is not to have a funding agreement to a SETA, and company that is affiliated to another SETA. So we've started doing that because we really are supporting the COS program fully. Thank you.
Okay, great. I'm going to move on again now to a slightly different topic. Zandile, I think in a way, in your opening comments, you've already sort of spoken a little bit about what is it going to need, what do we need to do to really scale up on the Centres of Specialisation? So, what is it that colleges need? Will colleges really be able to do this on a large scale? And how do we go about that? So, I mean, you've spoken a little bit about facilitators, about more businesses on board. I think the previous discussion, tries to address some of that. Over to you.
Thank you, Gerda. I think we need to just consider that the challenges that TVET's had in the past from history, there's been a lot of, hard work that DHET has put in to ensure that TVETs are well capacitated to deliver on skills development. So TVETs, yes, they are ready to take on even new trades, and even TVETs who haven't participated, they will be welcoming this opportunity. Of course, they can't do it without the financial backing and will require a lot of capacity development. It should not only focus on the facilitators, mentors, and project managers within the COS, also take it through to senior management of the college. Because if senior management of the college does not really have the necessary skills to be able to oversee the COS, it will not be successful. They have a very big role to play when it comes to the success of the COS. So basically, those are the issues, and of course, the infrastructure development, because our workshops will not necessarily be aligned to what the COS requires. So we need to do a lot of modification of buildings and procurement of equipment to be in line with what the curriculum requires. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that. So I think, you know, that always is an issue. It's about management will, it's about the support, it's about the maybe permanent project managers or whatever might go with that. Seamus, I can see you there. That means that our time is just about up. But before I close off, I think there is a question that I would just like to put out there as a last question. And Naftali, I'm gonna pose it to you. We've had a lot of SMME providers saying they also want to be, or not SMME providers, skills development providers, not necessarily public TVET colleges, say that how can they also participate in COS? Can they also be COS centers? I'm sure that you get some of those requests at MERSETA. Your view?
Yes. Yeah, it's a good question. We found the question coming through to us, especially, you know, for me, a good artisan is the one who's trained by an SDP who is, I would almost say, one and the same as the workplace. You know, SDPs who usually just run their own training facility and not necessarily being affiliated to a workplace, they don't get to see the product in the workplace after the person has qualified. So it's all about the exposure to the learning. So yes, you know, we need to find a way to move from legacy trades into new occupational qualifications, trades, because our trades are outdated. We all know that. I can't stress it enough. So therefore, therefore, we have to expand the provision. Obviously, TVET colleges are funded by the department, and SDPs wouldn't necessarily get a funding. And unfortunately, we as SETAs are only offering a grant, and grant must be understood by the definition of what a grant is. It's not about covering the true costs of the training. So yes, we need to consider that in a way so that we can, you know, sort of facilitate the advocacy and the implementation of occupational qualifications. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Naftali. Of course, that objective we all have in common. You know, it's about producing more artisans of high quality and so on. Mustak, perhaps, you know, I can ask you your view on, you know, should we make STPs centers of specialization?
I think, yeah, but you know, you look at centers of specialization and what's the overall purpose? I mean, the overall purpose is to deliver occupational qualifications and the occupational qualifications in the artisan trades. So if you have an SDP, which is coupled to a business or an organization, they are already delivering occupational qualifications. So I think in a way, you know, when we say, should we make SDP centers of specialization? They already are, those that are delivering these trades. I mean, you'll find a boilermaker being delivered at the TVET college in the occupational qualification, and exactly the same would be delivered at the company level as well. So they're already spaces of specialization and centers of specialization. I think there's other challenges and issues that, you know, do need to be looked at. And how do we then create a public-private partnership between those STPs and the public space DVETs, etc. as well? I think there's a lot of value that can be untapped. But I see Seamus is already switched on his video to say second strike and you'll go third strike and you're out. But I think the one area we need to explore is how do we enable public-private partnerships between the STPs and the public TVETs so we can more effectively deliver the large numbers that we have to. There's more than enough work and opportunity for STPs and TVETs, both public and private, but we need to establish a proper model that looks at public-private partnerships. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Heather.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of the three panelists for your input this morning. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so we have to wrap up the discussion here. There are many more questions that I can ask, and I'm sure many more things that you would like to say. But I think, Mustak, you probably ended it on a good note to say, let us think about you know, the bigger objective here. There's a lot of work to do, a lot of artisans to develop, especially if you go for an expanded idea of what an artisan should be. And it is about, you know, how do we get all role players together to continue to work at developing the artisans. And if the Centres of Specialisation model is working, the dual system model is working, those lessons are there to be shared and, you know, for everyone to participate in. So on that note, Seamus, thank you very much for the opportunity as well. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Heather. Yeah, I'm feeling really guilty. I'm sort of the person just responsible in theory for trying to keep us on time here. That was a fantastic panel, and very impressed with people's both expertise and experience. And thank you for your contributions. Great. We're going to move on as fast as possible, and we are now basically that Mr. Sabelo Buthelezi is now going to take us through just hopefully briefly key next steps in the COS program. Mr. Sabelo Buthelezi is the Chief Director, Special Project Unit within the DHET, and is actually responsible for setting up the Centres of Specialisation. So we're in the hands of an expert. Thank you. Over to you, Sabelo.
Thank you very much, Seamus. Let me try to I just got only two presentations from slides from my side. I hope you can see my slide.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you very much. On the way forward, I'll just share the two slides. One, basically taking on some of the findings and recommendations, and then on the second slide, on a number of other areas that we would like to share with the attendees so that they will just have some idea on what next in this project. And also we have taken note, especially from the panelists, around the issues that we need to do a lot of advocacy, especially with the employers, and also the role clarification. So my first slide on the way forward, part on the findings. One was talking to appropriate regulatory governance and funding structure. So what we are doing there, or what some of the actions that we are already taking there. When we started with 8 work streams, because we're still doing a lot of things, developing learning material, looking at funding and so on. So we will be reducing that so that we are improving efficiency and also the capacity of the project management unit. So some of those ones that have achieved their goals, we will be collapsing those, but I will give more details on the next slide. In terms of appropriate learning material, most learning material has been completed and evaluation is currently taking place. So that's the other area there that we started same time in terms of developing learning material while the project is also starting. In terms of increasing the capacity of TVET colleges to produce artisan, what we are finding there is that we need to institutionalize and mainstream the program so that we can start looking on more. There is even a talk that we need to look at non-artisan trade in terms of centers of specialization. Whether employers are able to train apprentices within this dual system approach. What's happening there is that first group is currently on the 3rd year. We have second group that was affected by COVID, but some of them are on the 1st and 2nd year, and we have planned for the 3rd group in 2022. And then in terms of SETAs effectively participating in the Centers of Specialization Programme. So as it comes there from the findings and recommendation. So we need full commitment of SETAs. Others are fully committed, but we need full commitment of SETAs beyond funding. Hence, we are constantly engaging with the SETAs. In terms of workplace approval is one of the areas that has been picked from the evaluation. In terms of timelessly processing and disbursing the grant, and in terms of standardizing the process. So those are the areas that we are currently looking at so that we remove some of the stumbling block that we have identified. In general way forward, what we are starting to do is that we had national oversight structure and some work stream. And then we are collapsing, as I've indicated, we are collapsing some of the, so that some of the activities are taken to our monthly occupational team convener meeting, and we report this to the executive committee of the Centers of Specialization. So some of the structures have been reduced, and we hope that we'll start getting more efficient, because at times some of the committees were a bit bulky and then lack in terms of efficiency. Reliance on OTC, I can't emphasize that more. It has been indicated that they've played a critical role in terms of ensuring that we are able to deliver the Centers of Specialization. But we need to start to ensure that some of the role of the occupational team conveners are slightly transferred to the college project managers, so that we build capacity of the college project managers. They work closely with occupational team conveners so that we are able to, in a longer term, achieve sustainability. So that's the area that we're also doing. Funding model, program funding at TVET is being reviewed. So it's part of the area that we have been looking at. So we are currently reviewing the funding model. And there's been inclusion of the Centers of Specialization on the funding grid of the TVET College. So now TVET College are able to plan ahead and say, this is the number of apprentices that we are planning to take for 2022, acknowledging the role of the workplace, that we can't just take apprentices without a workplace. So the workplace funding remains the responsibility of the SETAs, but we are also engaging with the skills branch so that we include the COS planning on the service level agreement of the SETA. In that way, it will make it easier so that we don't approach SETA by SETA, but we can just approach it from the service level agreement if we work closer with the skills branch. In terms of the NOC, that's the other area that has been picked up. There is a review that is in the pipeline so that we ensure that NOC is flexible enough and is also assisting in delivering, is assisting both college and employer in delivering this occupational qualification. So there is a review that is in the pipeline so that we see how have we done on with the NOC, and then how can we adjust if there are adjustments that are needed. The other area that has been raised is the facilitator and mentor training. I can't emphasize that more to say we constantly need to look at the training of the facilitator. We have been doing that, but at times we also don't want to take facilitators too much away from their work, which is training apprentices, and then we make we put them into training programs. But also with the assistance of some agencies like GIZ, we have started introducing the mentor training. But this basically highlights a bigger need to ensure that mentors at the workplace are capacitated and understand their role. So we will always be working on this. It might not be as quick as required, but there are work that we are doing in this regard. In terms of establishment of trade test, we have a trade test task team, and also one of the colleagues on the chart indicated that a trade test for 12 of the 13 trades have been developed and piloted. And then 11 of the 13 trades have already have trade test centers, and 6 of those are public TVET colleges and 6 are private. So we also now start to look in terms of that, what one of the panelists call the public-private partnership, where we will be training from the public colleges and using the private colleges to assess, but we also want to start using the public TVET colleges for assessing those apprentices that are trained on occupational programs by the private skills development providers. So we got quite a fairly balanced, and we got a target that before the end of the year, we will be having trade test centers for all of the 13 occupational trade, whether it's public or private. We should have that, so that we ensure that when we go for ISA next year, every apprentice, we do have a place where they can do the trade test. Also, we are busy with the development of face assessment, and we are piloting that. The reason that we have introduced face assessment is so that is part of the training of facilitators to develop integrated form of assessment that you can assess in an integrated way, where you take the knowledge component and integrate it to a practical component. So and then do it in that format of assessment where it is integrated. You don't only assess knowledge separate from the practical component. In terms of learning, teaching support material, that has been done, but we are busy with evaluation, and the purpose is that we load all that material. As soon as we are happy that it's up to the quality, we will load it on the National Open Learning System. But within the Centres of Specialisation, the learning material is available. All facilitators are having access to the learning material. And we are also developing the guidelines for the expansion of Centres of Specialisation to new TVET colleges and new occupation. So these are the process that we are currently doing. This is the way forward. I'm hoping, Seamus, that I've assisted in terms of your time. I've taken I've finished my way forward before the allocated time. Thank you, Seamus.
Thanks very much, Spela. It was, and so sorry to put a bit of pressure on you there. Basically, that I thought that was, by the way, just an excellent summary. Thank you, and thanks for dealing it within the timeframes. So it's just finally up to me just to call on Mr. Sam Zungu just to possibly just to provide closure for this particular session, and we'd just like to thank everybody and all participants for contributions within the seminar. Thank you.
No, thanks, Chairperson of the session, Dr. Niam. Really appreciate the way you have conducted the session. Very progressive indeed. Also, the interesting engagements that we have had with our panelists, very insightful, and all the inputs that we have received through the chat. Let me thank everyone that have participated in this webinar. Indeed, we have seen the presentation by Ms. Bray in terms of the findings. We're happy with the progress that has been made so far, and very extremely excited that this project started and we are now seeing the progress in some of the fruits. Of course, we cannot deny the fact that there are areas of improvement that we still need to work on. But thank you very much, Ms. Bray, for the presentation. Also, Dr. Kiwi from DHET, thank you very much for being part of these engagements. Let me also thank the very last speaker, Mr. Buthelezi, for providing the way forward. I think you've summed up everything from the key findings that we have been presented with today, but also chanted the way forward as to what needs to be done from now on. So to all of you colleagues, thank you very much. We do take note on some of the things that you have raised as still part of the concerns that needs to be addressed, and I'm sure we will be able to attend to all of those issues that have been raised today. But once more, thank you to all of you, and I wish Mustaq that at some point we can have another side discussion about the lead employer with Dr. Florence Prinsu, if we do find time that we can discuss that particular issue. Obviously, with limitations in our context as South Africans in terms of our small, medium enterprises and the increasing number of them operating in what is called informal sector. And how can we also maybe through business chambers bring those or some of those informal businesses so that they can also increase participation in terms of training and development of apprentices. But to all of you colleagues, thank you very much, organizers, everyone else, and our chair for the session, Dr. Niam. Once more, thank you, and wish you everything of the best, and those that are from the colleges, everything of the best, and looking forward to more inputs in terms of how to improve our centers of specialization. All the best, colleagues. May you all have a wonderful day further. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Mr. Zungu. That was really appreciated, and thanks just to everybody for basically, particularly the panelists, and just for this absolutely solid attendance. Thank you very much, and we hope that you enjoyed the session. I found it fascinating myself, and I think that was an excellent presentation, and I think that this kind of research is absolutely crucial. But I'd also really like to thank the DHET for their support and absolute engagement in what is turning into be a very strong project. Thank you, and I hope you have a great afternoon. Bye-bye from us. Bye-bye.